Hello, and welcome to Presenting, a podcast where we chat about various topics related to role playing games. I'm John Godek. With me today is Dave Scott. Welcome to the podcast. So,
Thank you for having me, and thank you for sending me the notice on the color coordination.
yes, very important, very important. So, Dave is a serial entrepreneur who owns and founded Evil Genius Productions, the publishers of Everyday Heroes, a tabletop RPG that brings D20 Modern up to speed with 5th edition. And is it going to go up into the D&D 1 as well, or is that something that caught you a little by surprise?
Well, we heard about D&D 1, and we're very excited about some of the things that they're going to change in it. But we really don't have any details yet to determine, whether or not we would or we should.
Yeah.
So, for example, I heard rumors that they're really going to tackle the inclusion and diversity thing, which is amazing.
Finally.
Which is usually more of an artistic problem than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
But then in relation to that, my understanding is they're also going to sort of remove racial attributes. So you don't pick your attributes like strength and con based on race. And what's interesting is with Everyday Heroes, we already did that.
Yes.
So with Everyday Heroes, you can pick your nationality, you can pick your whatever, but then the way you get your attributes was by background and profession, which sounds a lot similar to what D&D 1 is doing.
Yes.
So I think we're actually potentially ahead of the trend.
Well, and it's supposed to be 100% backwards compatible from what I've been reading as well. So I don't think it should be any issues. It's just kind of funny the timing, of it coming out and everything.
I'm sure they're going to produce the guidelines the day that we start printing the book. That exact time and window is exactly when they're going to say, nope, it's all different now.
Well, you can do digital errata then, right? So.
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%.
So Dave, can you talk a little bit about your background and what led you to founding Evil Genius Productions here last year?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a little bit of imposter syndrome because I really know nothing about the industry of building role-playing games. Like everyone else in this industry, I started very young. At 11 years old, I was introduced in summer camp to Return to White Plume Mountain, and my life was forever changed. And I've been a long time, attendee of Gen Con. I was actually going to Gen Con when it was in Milwaukee.
Wow.
Yeah. I was actually, fun fact, I think I'm one of the very, very first VIGs ever to sign up because like an idiot, I love paying 10 times more than the sticker price for my 4-day ticket. And I've been one ever since. So I've obviously been a big fanboy of it all. But the real motivation came to it when I actually bumped into Jeff Grubb in Seattle.
Wow!
And I go, "You're Jeff Grubb. Like, you made my favorite game of all time, D20 Modern. Can I buy you a beer?" Yeah. And Jeff was like, "I'll always take a free beer." So we had a great time drinking some beer, just going through the nostalgia of the game, and just me falling in love with it all over again. And I said, and he was talking about now 20 years hindsight, what he would change if he were to do it all over again. And we talked about 5th edition and how that mattered. And, he kind of came out and I said, we should really kind of refresh this thing. And his first response was, hell no. And then after a couple of beers, it just became no. Yeah. And then after a few more beers, it became maybe, and then we launched the business a couple weeks later. So, that's how I got in the industry, just as a fanboy, really, really hoping that someone would make this product so I could play it. And then what ended up happening was Jeff was able to pull together really one of the best sort of ensembles of game designers I've ever heard of. And they ended up making just a gorgeous game.
Yeah. Where did you run into Jeff, by the way? I mean, how did that happenstance occur?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm historically a marketer. Yeah. I actually worked for Amazon in their marketing group, and he also worked for Amazon. Right. He actually worked for the Studios group doing writing for a lot of their games, and so that's how we ran into each other. We were in the same building, and just a funny story. Guess who else works in that exact same building? 3 of us from Evil Genius Games. Carlos Cabrera
Oh, yes,
works in the
yes,
exact same
yes.
building. And it was funny because I met him on the first day of my job and he was wearing a Pathfinder pin.
Hmm.
And we talked about Pathfinder just kind of, as polite
Right.
conversation. Lo and behold, fast forward a year later and I hire him as one of my first writers.
Very neat. Very neat. Yeah.
So that one short block in Seattle was very magical for the creation of this business.
And you were just visiting, right? You don't actually work out of Seattle now.
I don't. Yeah, I was just visiting. I work out of I'm out of the San Francisco area, so I literally was just visiting
Wow.
to pick up my badge and all the other good stuff when all these beautiful occurrences happened.
So you mentioned that Jeff helped assemble this kind of team for your Evil Genius Productions. Can you talk about how that process went? The recruiting. Was it just he went to his Rolodex and said, "Here's the 10 people that we need to get," or was it kind of more happenstance, kind of like you described your meeting with Jeff and then even Carlos?
Yeah, that's kind of how it worked out. He was like, I got a couple Slack groups and friends, and I play D&D on
Yeah.
Thursday nights with a bunch of Wizards of the Coast people. I'll poke around. and then the first time he came back and he goes, Dave, no one's interested. And I'm like, oh my God,
Really?
no one is interested. And I was like, try again. He's like, okay, I'll try again. And then like maybe one or two people were interested. Anyway, it went through that for a while until we assembled our team. And then now we've got Sig Trent, right, who worked for who did the Big Book of Feats and stuff like that. We've got Stan Brown, who was one of the writers of multiple supplements for D20 Modern. Michelle Carter Slavicek, wife of Bill Slavicek, who was the original editor of the game. And then we just started assembling these just unbelievable human beings. And then I ended up saying, listen, I'm not going to do this game unless we can fix the chase mechanics. I hate chase mechanics.
Yes, I agree.
And so I go, we got to fix it. And so I went out on the internet and started looking for people who had designed alternative chase mechanics. And I found this kid out of New Jersey that was on DM's Guild and had five-star ratings for this chase mechanic he created. And I hired him. And it turns out he's brilliant and he's one of the best designers we have. And it just so happened that all these people tended to work harmoniously with each other. And we just had a lot of fun building this game.
Now, and everybody's working remote, I'm gathering? You're not putting them all in one place?
Everyone's working remote. Yeah. I mean, the first time I met most of the people was at Gen Con.
Mm-hmm.
So we majority of the work we had done was over Discord. And again, we worked beautifully. We never missed a deadline. We never fought. I mean, we had disagreements as to sort of how we might want to consider this mechanic or that mechanic, but ultimately we resolved them. And I'm really one of the things I'm really proud of is just building a strong culture.
Mm-hmm. And one of my favorite people you haven't mentioned, how did you get your editor there?
Which one? We have six.
How did you get Owen Casey Stevens? That's who I'm interested in.
Yes, yeah. So when it came to sort of writing these adventures, I said, I really respect what Paizo does with writing. I think the quality is very, very strong. I'm a huge fan of Pathfinder. And so I read these articles where they were showcasing their freelancers.
Mm-hmm.
And Owen was on that list as a sort of, freelancer extraordinaire. And I approached him and like 10 other people. And most of them were like, I'm too busy. And Owen's like, this sounds interesting.
Yeah.
And we started chatting. He's like, I'm a huge fan of kaiju. So the very first thing we hired Owen on was Kong versus Kong Skull Island.
Mm-hmm.
And then we signed that contract. And then he started looking into our deal and he goes, I know Jeff Grubb really well. I know Stan Brown really well. I know Michelle Carter really well. He goes, what you're putting together is really, really interesting. Let's talk about how I can be more involved. Mm-hmm. And then that's how it came together.
Nice. And so I guess what's the role that Jeff plays and what's the role that Owen and Stan play? Do you have a developer in there role for them, or do you have? So I mean, I see the team. I'm just kind of curious how you're envisioning the relationships there.
Yeah, absolutely. So it originally started with Dan and with Stan and Jeff. So really, what Jeff was more like the editor in
Right.
chief acting. So what he did was, and we call him a design consultant. And what he did was he sat on the design meetings, he critiqued things, he read rules mechanics and poked holes in them. He helped us devise rule mechanics, things along those lines. So he was heavily involved in the design, but he was really more giving us advice and advising, while Sig and Goober really wrote the
Hmm.
words. Stan's job was more of a producer, so his focus was trains running on time, making sure that we had connectivity, that people were
Hmm.
writing, that they were unblocked. But then he also recruited our editing
Right.
team, which included Michelle Carter, and brought them together. He recruited some of our artists, and so he had his hooks in the industry where he can pull people in as experts when we needed to, just based off his own reputation. So when Owen came on board, he really sort of replaced Jeff as a day to day
Right.
person, where he's really running the show from a creative
Hmm.
perspective,
Hmm.
quality control, hiring artists, hiring writers and designers. Jeff has sort of stepped back and becoming more of an advisor or maintaining his advisor role. And then we hired an amazing person, Jennifer Barnett from Roll20, and she's our producer. And so she's coming in with a management background, and she's actually keeping the trains running on time, which now puts Stan more as an advisor
Hmm.
than he was
Hmm.
before.
It seems like you've really put in place a large team from the beginning and have just expanded it. That's a lot different than other startups that I've seen. Usually it's really small, a couple people are doing everything, and then maybe, oh, this is too much for us, and we'll bring in a couple people. You've like put in this huge infrastructure right from the start. Is that how does that fit with your vision, I guess, for the game? It seems like you got some idea where you want to go. Where is that?
Yeah, and so first and foremost, like we're actually up to like 25
Yeah, that's a
headcounts,
lot for a
and,
new
and
publisher.
it is a lot, but we have a really ambitious schedule, and so we're talking about a core rule book, we're talking about 8 cinematic adventures, we're talking about 4 follow-on adventure paths after that, we're talking about a miniatures game. So we actually have our roadmap set for 2023 and 2024, and now we're having conversations about 2025. So I'm really excited about the path that we're taking. But one of the things I really wanted to make sure happened was I wanted to write a game I would play,
Mhm.
and that meant it had to be good. And if all these amazing cinematic adventures, Rambo and Pacific Rim, had to sit on a core rulebook, that core rulebook has got to stand the test of time. There's a reason why thousands of people still play D20 Modern, was because even though it's 20 years old, it was a really good
Mhm.
system. And we had to honor that by creating a really, really good system. So when I first had a conversation with Stan, he goes, "Well, what are you looking for? Are you looking for Wizards of the Coast quality? Or are you looking for startup quality?" And I said, if we're really going to invest in this game, let's go with Wizards of the Coast quality. And then we started to map out what that took. Now, if you talk to Owen, he'll lament to you that we still cut a lot of
Mhm.
corners because we had to save
Mhm.
money. This was not a 5-year
Right.
project with thousands of play testers and hundreds of hours. Like we couldn't afford that, but it is definitely a robust process in relation to three folks sitting around a dinner table writing.
No, yeah, for sure, for sure. And so you've kind of mentioned where you have it mapped out for 2023, 2024, 2025. Where do you see this company in 5 or 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, it was amazing when we got to Gen Con this year. We were in the Entrepreneurs
Mhm.
Avenue, probably in another state. It was that far away from the rest of the things. Like it was all right, but everyone starts there, so that's the beautiful thing about that. But as I walked around the floor, what I very very quickly realized is that there's a dearth of role playing games and even miniature games around the modern day setting.
Mhm.
Thousands of D&D and fantasy based stories going on, hundreds of science fiction in all of its glory and all of its flavor, but nothing sitting squarely in the genre that we're prepared to take on. Which is surprising because if you take a look at video games, it's just the exact
Hmm.
opposite. Modern day dominates video games. The Last of Us, right? Tomb Raider, Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six. I mean, if you and on and on and on. Grand Theft Auto, right? So many of the billion-dollar franchises are. So what are video games doing differently than we are, where they're actually really able to take that whole role-playing experience, to another level? So I think that there's a space for us to be in and have a role. My goal is to be able to get um, as many of our rule books in the hands of as many people as possible worldwide, so that we can start to build an ecosystem of amazing modern day role playing games. And that's one of the reasons why we launched our third party publishing
Hmm.
platform, is because we want to let anyone who's got an idea go through the process of building their own game, and not having to worry about the rules. Just focus on your story and the adventure and the fun stuff, and we'll help you sell it, because we think that in 5 years time, I'd like to see a quarter of that floor be modern day games of some sort.
Wow. Wow. And it looks like, I mentioned you're a serial entrepreneur. You have some background in growing companies. So it sounds like you kind of know what you're doing here. And kind of along those lines, one of the things that I find pretty unique for a startup company is you have all these licenses, the Crow, Pacific Rim, Kong Skull Island, Highlander, Rambo, Total Recall, Universal Soldier, Escape from New York, and I'm sure there are more. Um, First of all, what kind of led you to these particular properties and to take this approach? You're building a game. You could have kind of made up your own modern stories instead. And then what are some of the challenges that you faced getting these licenses?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, honestly, I wish I would have gone out with four, not eight, because now I've got this multivariate equation I'm trying to solve,
Mm-hmm.
and still maintain high quality. But I mean, when I first started thinking about this game, right, we already knew, like, one of the things that made D20 Modern successful were the 11 supplements that they created thereafter, right? So one was a zombie apocalypse one was a scanners one was a UFO and alien one, one was a future one was a noir one, and so we knew that there was a lot of stories we wanted to tackle. But what I didn't want to do is I didn't want to create fictional worlds. Like, I didn't want
Right.
Nueva New York, or faux
Right.
Seattle, because I'm a movie buff, and I love so many great movies that are out there, and I sit in those meetings and daydream. If I was role playing this
Mm-hmm.
movie,
Mm-hmm.
how would I actually play it out? Just the other day, I was role playing. I was watching Bullet Train, which
Yeah.
is an amazing movie with Brad Pitt. That right there was such a rich world. I could see us creating several adventures based on Bullet Train, just from the 2 hour experience I got, just with the richness of background. So what I realized was, when writers write these movies, they are building worlds at the same time. And it's a shame that those worlds go away after 2 hours,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because some of them are so interesting, and I'd love to explore it. Let's take in point Total Recall, one of my favorite of the 8 that we're going to create. So Total Recall, and let's ignore the second one. Let's just focus on the good
Okay.
one.
All right.
Total Recall, you can remember, had a lot of things going on. So first of all, the mind wipe and the resistance and so
Mm-hmm.
on and so forth. There were so many unanswered questions. So many, John. Like, for example, you had a bunch of mutants going around and going, "Look at my crazy arm,"
Yeah.
and that was it. No one said, how did they get the crazy arm? No one said, what could the crazy arm do? Like, I had a lot of questions about what these mutants are. What did they do? How do they
Mm-hmm.
survive?
Mm-hmm.
Things along those lines. And so what we're going to do is we're going to build out a whole mutation system where, as a feat, you can take a mutation, and, like, you could have a mutated leg, and that gives you plus 10 to your speed. You can have a mutated eye that gives you dark vision. You could be an abomination, be a total mutation with and have ogre-like strength,
Mm-hmm.
right? So the idea is, let's take that little thread of the movie and let's just run it out to its end and see what's kind of going on. The second thing that I love absolutely about this movie is, in the last 30 seconds, they find an alien artifact They flip a switch, and in 30 seconds, there's atmosphere.
Mm-hmm.
What I want to know is, how is that done? How can you provide an atmosphere for a large planet in 30 seconds? Right? Like while the guy is choking. Like, who made that alien technology? Where are they now? What other alien technology have they created? Like, there's so much question around that. I can see an entire adventure path just focused on, hunting Martian artifacts and discovering their lineage and so on and so forth.
Yeah. Now, so you mentioned Total Recall there. That's a franchise that kind of is a one and done. I mean, they did a remake, but they're not doing sequels and prequels and lots of other things like that. So that's a different world than, say, Kong, right? Skull Island, where you have a series of movies and presumably additional movies there. What are the challenges working with one that's a one and done like Total Recall versus one that's an ongoing series? Even like from now, like Highlander's got several iterations, but it's probably done. Kong's going to keep going, right? So what's the differences in those challenges?
Yeah, so the creative approach is very different. And so, as you could probably imagine, with Total Recall, we've got a tremendous amount of latitude on how we interpret some of the things. We just got off a phone call where we pitched the Crow producers on our interpretation of the Crow, which I'm going to tell you is wild. We have a wild interpretation of it. And they sat back and they said, like, how did you even think of that? That's amazing. Right? Like, we didn't even think about that. And so that's an example of someone who's very open-minded. On the other hand, with like the Pacific Rim and Kong, which are owned by Legendary Pictures, they have a creative team, a creative council. They have a Pacific Rim lore master. And so we've got to come in and say, here's where we fit in the timeline. Here's the story. And so on and so, and they'll go back and go, no, you can't say that, or you can't do that part of the story because we've got a movie that's going to come out that's going to contradict, or your naming structures is wrong, or things along those lines. When we first got those contracts, they gave us a 1,000-page Bible.
Wow.
So I now know who the next 10 monsters are that Kong's going to fight, because they've already laid out the whole universe, which is great for us because now we get to sort of say, how do we participate in that storytelling, and not step on the toes of what you guys are doing? And I think that's a different challenge, but equally as fun.
And your game can grow with each movie. I mean, basically, the nice thing about these brands is that they have a big following. People already know what it stands for, and you're just kind of leveraging that. I mean, you have extensive experience in marketing, and I'm sure this probably came to mind that, I could create my own worlds that nobody knows about, or I could take some world famous things out there that people already know, and they'll say, I want to do this. I want to do this. And I'm sure there's some really exciting franchises out there that you are probably targeting that are even bigger than these ones that you've looked at so far. So I guess, to what extent has your background in marketing helped inform your decisions and maybe even give you, an advantage as a new publishing company?
Yeah, so it probably doesn't probably give me enough because I'm still on the fanboy phase.
Yeah.
So there's no surprise that the 8 films are 8 of my favorite films. And I probably could have done a little bit more scientific rigor around it. And so, but now we're starting to take a look with a little bit more soberness, and we're starting to sort of say, what is the fan base look like, and put that as a part of our equation, because there are some properties that we would have never considered doing, but the fan base is huge.
Oh.
And so maybe we need to sort of like take advantage of that, right? That's a possibility. One thing that you talked about was sort of what were the pitfalls of our approach, and I'll tell you. Now, the biggest downside of having so many amazing licenses is that when we launched, no one believed us.
Yeah.
In fact, there were literally responses to our posts on Facebook where people are saying, "This is a scam. Do not believe them. They're stealing your money." And what's even worse was, John, when we first launched our Kickstarter, 4 days into it, my Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp got banned for violating third-party licenses
Wow. Wow.
because people were reporting
Yeah.
us. And Facebook has no means for me to prove that I have the licenses or not. Like I can't like upload a
Right.
contract or whatever.
Right.
So for 4 months, I could not Facebook anybody in my family because of these trolls that came in and swore that we didn't have licenses that we paid dearly for.
Yeah. Wow. That's funny. But now I would imagine that'd be a great story for getting some publicity around. I was banned by Facebook for having something I actually did because nobody believed it was so fantastic. So no, that's awesome. That's awesome. And so you want to tell me some more of your favorite movies?
Are you trying to milk me?
No. I can wait. I can wait. I can wait. So shifting gears here a little bit. So Evil Genius Productions is one of the few black-owned game publishers in the world today. What are some of the challenges that people of color face when they're looking to break into the game publishing industry?
Yeah, it's a really good question because I didn't come in from that lens.
Yeah.
I came in from a geek boy lens, and then obviously I had the funds to do what I did,
Mm-hmm.
which meant that I didn't have to scrape by. But what was interesting is it's a bit of a dichotomy, right? So on one end, I found it to be really inclusive, and I think people are starting to talk about this sort of stuff. They're starting to care about it, and it was even to the point where, as I started to seek partners to go partner with, it didn't matter what my skin color was. They wanted to know whether or not the product was going to be inclusive,
Right. Wow. Right.
and I had to prove it like anybody else.
Yeah.
And then on the other hand, we just have to understand and appreciate that this industry started with white males, and it is dominated by white males. And in fact, when I used to go to Gen Con in Wisconsin, I didn't see a lot of me.
Yeah.
And I used to joke that the men's bathroom had a line, but the women's bathroom didn't.
Yep. Yeah.
But through all that experience is like I still had a really wonderful experience. I never felt, unsafe or unwelcome when I went to cons and stuff like that. But we weren't there. And when I was starting out in this space, the Black community did not understand role playing games or like it, and it was very hard to communicate what I did to my community because it was very, very foreign.
Mm-hmm.
Why are you not watching Monday Night Football? So I had to hide who I was, and even in my own community, because it was not acceptable. But things have turned now. I see a very, very different complexion to Gen Con and other gaming conventions I have. It's beautiful not to be the only person there. But we have seen some resistance, and I'll give you one example. When I first did my first PR read saying, hey, we started this company, I said that I was a Black-owned company. And I got one of either two responses. One is, that's amazing. We want to write a story about you because you are a Black-owned company. And I had a lot of writers that said, why does that matter? And why are you playing the race card? But I had a really beautiful interaction with one of them where he said, listen, why are you playing the race card? I think that's unfair. You should be working off your own merits. And then I said, well, let's talk about merits. Jeff Grubb, Stan Brown, Michelle Carter. And the guy wrote back to me and he goes, those are pretty good merits. And he wrote one of the best articles about my company that has ever been written so far.
Nice. Very good. Very good. Yeah. When you kind of mention that, when people talk about playing the race card, it's like, if you look at the industry, even conventions now, I went to Gen Con just a couple years ago there are not a lot of women or people of color playing the games, and there's not a lot of leadership, even though they're trying to get inclusiveness in the games themselves. So representation matters. And I think if you show that you can be successful in this space, that encourages others to try. It's not like you're trying to gain an advantage, you're trying to gain publicity, but it's meaningful. And so I think that's an important aspect of it, that people who don't think of that way because they've never had to think of encouraging others like themselves to play, it doesn't cross their minds. So
I really think that's right, right? Like you model behavior that you see. And so if you're in a community which never has seen this as an industry,
right,
no matter how much this would appeal to you as an occupation, you're not going to go down this route.
right,
You're going to go with what you see. If your mom's a teacher, you'll be a
yep,
teacher. If your dad's a nurse, you're going to be a nurse. And so just saying that there are people like me who exist in this
mm-hmm.
industry, and this is the sort of interesting stuff we are doing, I think is a motivation enough to be more inclusive, and people just want to see themselves
Yep.
reflected in the games and in the people who make the games. I just had a really wonderful conversation with a little guy, a little kid, not a young adult out of Nigeria, which actually crowdsourced funding so he could actually create the very first convention in Nigeria.
Wow, wow,
And he had 100 people
yeah,
show up.
that's a good turnout for something
And
new.
right, yeah, but like, and I said, I was like, how keep it up?
Yeah,
Like, how can I help you? I'll send you books or whatever, but like, keep this
yeah,
going because that's a huge market, and shame on this industry for not tapping into
mm-hmm.
a gigantic market like that.
Yeah, wow,
And if I'm going to be the first and I'm going to be successful, good on me, right? But like, how do we neglect that huge market before, right? And so, I just told him to keep going, just keep going.
very cool. So, what advice do you have for people interested in getting involved in publishing for RPGs? And in addition to that, I know that you have a spot on your website for people interested in working for you. What are the type of things that you look for adding people to your team?
Yeah, well, I mean, so gosh, our team is really small, and given that it's small, it does require expertise. So we don't have a lot of interns running
Hmm, hmm.
around. We got a lot of people who can do it. It's just like we don't have a lot of money. We need people who know how to do it. So that limits our pool in terms of hiring. But we're always hiring writers, artists. I was actually on the phone today. I need three more battle map designers.
Wow. Yeah.
And how can I find a battle map designer that's willing to do modern? Because guess what? The libraries don't include modern stuff. So we're always looking for those kinds of people for sure. Over time we'll need more writers. We already have 8 on staff now, so we're pretty
Hmm,
full.
hmm.
And but the thing about it is, we also released a third-party
Right.
platform, publishing platform. Where anybody can license our rule book and write their own story. Anyone. And it doesn't take money, it just takes time.
Hmm.
And you could just say, listen, I've got a homebrew for 30 years. I think I've got enough material. I'm going to turn that into an adventure. And we'll not only support you in doing that, but we'll help you sell the product. We'll help you get up on Kickstarter. We'll put you in stores if that's what we need to do. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to create an ecosystem. We'll let anybody into our ecosystem. We just want great stories being made.
Now, if somebody wanted to become a publisher, kind of not in obviously your space, right, but in a space adjacent, what advice would you have for them?
Right. Just start writing. Find a compelling story to tell, and start writing. An adventure could be 5,000
Yep.
words. It doesn't have to be 170,000 words. And get it out there. There's DM's Guild. There's Drive Through. There's so many paths just to get your work out there, and then of course our program. Get out there. Start getting some chops in this whole thing. That's what I really love. Just in general, even about entrepreneurship. I was in tech entrepreneurship,
Mhm.
but all you needed was an idea and an MVP, minimum viable
Yep.
solution, right? Minimum viable product, and just the gumption to go out and find a customer to use your product, and you had a business. This is the same way, maybe even easier, because you don't have as much startup costs and complexity. So I think anybody can do this, and I encourage anybody to come to us with an idea and do it.
Very cool. So, what's next for Dave? What kind of cool things are you working on now that you can actually talk about? Share with us.
Yeah, I mean, well, first things first, like we first got to get these products out the door. and people have to like them.
Yeah.
Please like your product. So it's got to be good. Yeah. So for me, it's eyes on the prize delivering that. But as we look beyond this, I really want to push the limits of what we call modern day role playing games. And so, what does that mean, right? What it means is that you may see Evil Genius games going in very, very non-typical directions. I want to do horror. Horror is difficult, right? Because in a normal role playing game, you find a character, you level them up to level 10, and people rarely die. But in horror, they're supposed to die to carry the story forward. So we got to think about what kind of mechanic works for that. I want to do kids on bikes types of stuff, right? Like, there's lots of really, really great movies and stories around kids that don't have to carry weapons or not the greatest martial artists in the world, but they're doing fun stuff. I want to create a kids-based game or system that allows you to tell those stories. I want to do comedy. I want to figure out a way to do a sitcom adventure.
A sitcom adventure. Okay, not a parody, right? A sitcom adventure. A modern
I
day,
do.
like Three's Company adventure kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah. Maybe where you got to get the laugh-o-meter
Yeah,
going or something
yeah,
like that. But like, so you might see some goofy, wacky stuff for us. It's all
yeah.
experimental. It's all with the idea of pushing the genre. It may not sell a lot, but I'll be fun. I'll be teased by it. Um, and I'll tell you that this whole adventure started several years ago, John. I haven't told people this. Several years ago, where I actually wrote a D20 Modern adventure based on the amazing, incomparable movie starring the amazing, incomparable Patrick Swayze called Roadhouse.
Nice. Wow.
And it was one of the best adventures I ever created. And if I could get that license, I will publish
Yeah,
it. I'm not a writer. I'm not an adventure writer, but I did that
yeah,
one. And that was what convinced Stan to work with me because he thought that was so outlandish
yeah.
that I did that. That he's like, all right, let's work together. But Roadhouse is where it all started.
Very cool. Well, Dave, this has been very informative. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us here on the podcast today.
Absolutely, anytime.